I'm your host, Dr. M, and you're listening to Aligned You, a podcast to assist you to truly be aligned through your body, head, and heart so you can reach your full potential in your own unique way. Hey there, Aligned You listeners, Dr. M here, and welcome to this week's episode. I am pumped for this week's episode. Number one, I'm pumped because now we are 2 weeks in a row. The rhythm is now set, folks. It is in, locked and loaded. There will be weekly downloads or drops of Aligned You, which I'm excited to be sharing with you about. But this week's episode, before I get too off track early on, this week's episode is all about how sometimes you have to go backwards before you can actually go forwards in life, where there's times where different trials and tribulations will be thrown at you, and it might sit you on your butt a little bit like what I discussed on last week's episode. But that's all well and good. What are you going to do to actually make change coming out of it? So in this week's episode, Aligned You listeners, I'm going to take us back to a quiz that I have been talking about for years. It has had a revamp and a rename, and it is now known as a body stress score. The body stress scores quiz, put my teeth back in, quiz, which you can find on alignedyou.com.au. That's ALIGNED, the letter u.com.au. You can find it there. It's a free quiz, which actually gives you the baselines of where you are right now, so that you know what areas of life perhaps you need to focus on, particularly when it comes to our physical being. Because one of the things that I've certainly noticed, and I've noticed with my clients as well and have experienced both at a personal level and also with clients, is that in those times where you're being sat back on your butt, you are usually getting signs and signals from your body, sometimes from the universe, sometimes from people around you that you love, that is actually telling you that you're heading in slightly the wrong direction. Now, sometimes life just throws you curveballs and you actually need to bunker in and weather the storm. And as you're coming out the other side, it's a great time to actually have a self-audit and see which areas of life, from that physical, chemical, and emotional point of view when it comes to the stresses that are around us, talk more about that in just a moment, is that sometimes you actually need to take stock and an audit of what parts of my life is serving me and what is not. I'll give you an example. When we were actually moving house, it would be about 6 weeks ago, we knew a move was on the cards. Those of you who live in Australia would know, particularly if you're in Sydney, there's been all sorts of interesting things happening with the property markets, particularly in the rental market. And my beautiful wife, Ames, and I rent our property that we live in close by to our practice here in Alexandria. And we knew that things were changing and that the owner of the property we're in was going to be making some change. And as it turned out, they were putting up the rent up significantly, weren't willing to negotiate. So we set very clear intentions about what we wanted to pay, what we wanted in a home. And within 24 hours of setting that very clear intention, our current home actually popped online. And within 3 days, we actually had it confirmed that it was ours. And within 10 days, we had actually moved into our new house. And within 14 days, we'd actually not only moved into our new house, completely unpacked, but also handed back keys to the old owner. And we were all done and dusted, the whole process within 2 weeks. Now, I am not suggesting that anybody else does it in that warp quantum speed, because it took its toll in other areas. Whilst it was amazing and absolutely the universe lined up and we came into alignment for the right property in a tight market to pop exactly where we wanted, with all of the keys that we wanted, all of the tick boxes of what we wanted in our perfect next home were actually ticked. And it was a very interesting couple of weeks for a few different reasons. Why do I share this story? Because over those few weeks, as we went into overdrive to maintain what you see behind us running, which is Mitchell Road Chiropractic here in Alexandria, but also my beautiful wife, Ames, I'd said to her so we found out on the Monday. So we saw the property online on the Thursday, found out on the Monday it was ours if we wanted it. Then on the Monday afternoon, I said, geez, do you reckon we could move in a week if we tried? And Ames said, watch me. And so my beautiful wife carried on packing up our house at absolute quantum speed. But what toll did that take? It threw us into some really interesting habits where we'd been actually eating really well. We'd been looking after ourselves. We hadn't been drinking too much booze, a little bit of booze, but not too much. So then all of a sudden that went flying out the window, where for 2 weeks solid, we actually turned into 3 weeks as we were settling into the new house with everything going on. Cooking from home stopped because everything was packed up. I made the error of not actually asking for a knife as well at one point. I didn't realize Ames had said, is all we need a fork and spoon? And I went, yep, thinking she meant knife as well, which then I found out as we were having steak one night that no, she literally meant fork and spoon, and then handed me a chef's knife to cut up my steak. But what it meant was, from eating at home more often than not, that went out the window. We were eating more takeaway. All of a sudden, a glass of wine seemed very tempting, and not beyond tempting, it was being had. A glass of wine was turning into a bottle of wine. On the weekend, it was turning into 2 bottles of wine. You can see where this path goes. Now, some of you listening actually might have been down that path before, where you've been super strict for a period of time. We've done that. Earlier in the year, I think I was recording about it, we went through a period earlier in this year where we were actually booze-free for nearly 3 months. Now, why were we booze-free? Because it served us at the time. At that time, I think I was mentioned to you guys, is that I've been in the throes of working out how to manage and best function during perimenopause. It's cute. For those people that have never experienced it before, and I was one of them, is I never really understood it until you went through it. I guess we can speak to that on multiple aspects of life, right? Where there's things that we haven't gone through, and we can empathize or have compassion for people, but we might not truly be able to understand it because we haven't been through it. But early in the year, I realized with all these hot flashes that I was having, is that perhaps booze wasn't being helpful. Perhaps eating foods that were creating inflammation, also not helpful. So I cut all of that out. Then we went through some trials and tribulations, and that kind of all went out the window. And I've recorded podcasts before about the importance of understanding not to get into a massive pendulum swing when you're going from extreme to extreme. It's like vegans becoming then Paleolithic eaters because they actually don't land somewhere in the middle. In the same way for us, is we went from being completely booze-free to then swinging back up the other end of the spectrum where we were just drinking too much. It wasn't serving us. It was creating inflammation. It was making me snore. I was getting a lot of smacks in the back for snoring of an evening. So it was really important. It was about 3 weeks in, which is much quicker than I used to catch it, folks. 3 weeks in of some really not great habits sneaking in, that we just called it and then have reeled it all back in. Goodness, what week are we up to? I think we're up to week 5 of being booze-free. And it's not so much for me about the booze-free. It's actually about the discipline that I wanted to set in place. And as I mentioned in last week's episode, when it was time to shift the frame, is so important to actually look at what was going on around us. What frame did we want to have? What relationship do I actually want to have when it comes to food and alcohol, and how that creates social engagement for me with some of my favorite people? What do I want that to look like in the future? And also, most importantly, how does it serve me? Not being worried about how it serves them, but how does it serve me? Because right now is that I know that I need to shift things up. I can give it a nudge with anybody. I can go toe to toe with most. The issue is not during, it is definitely after now, because I just don't pull up like I used to. And it just doesn't seem as appealing. I've had some very, very fun nights, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this, where a cheeky drink has turned into a big boozy afternoon. And personally, I've been congratulated by the evening staff coming back onto their second shift. Not something I boast about for the sake of, oh, yay me, more so to let you know that this shit happens sometimes, and it's part of being human. What's also part of being human is understanding, does it serve me or does it not serve me? And having that next level of awareness of moving forward, what is that relationship that I want it to be? So, Aligned You listeners, one of your homeworks for this week, if you choose to do it, you don't have to, if you choose to do it, is to actually check in. It might not be booze for you. It might be a relationship with food. It might be a relationship with that toxic friend that actually is always getting in your ear, that is no longer serving you. And maybe you've given them that little bit too much time over the last little bit, because they might have been going through something and you felt like you needed to be there out of obligation versus out of benefit to you. I hope that makes sense. Sometimes as I start talking about these things, people occasionally think it sounds quite selfish to talk about it in that way. Whereas the way that I look at it now, very much so, is that you've got to give yourself oxygen first. Otherwise, you're no good to anybody else. I look at that very much within my chiropractic practice, is through that period where we weren't eating super well, we're eating too much takeout, we're spending too much money. We've been working on being more frugal this year, not cheap, but frugal, and being aware of where our finances are going, because that had been very loosey-goosey for a period of time, and it took its toll, where all these $10 were going here, $50 were going here, lunch was going there, and we were eating stuff that didn't make us feel good. So it was that added layer of, goodness, I can cook that better at home. What are we doing actually eating out? I'm actually quite a good cook. What are we doing? So in terms of with that is having that awareness around what is it at the moment that might be holding you back? what's getting in your way of the next level of you? As I said, for us, and I do say us, for myself and Ames, is that we realized that we had been, didn't have a healthy relationship when it came to food and dieting and detoxing and all of those sorts of things. And we were pendulum swinging one into the other. Oh, we'll just tidy that up and go really strict. And then we would start off in moderation, but the moderation would tick into not being so moderate quite quickly. So now as we step into this new version of us, because I think we get to reinvent ourselves regularly, Aligned to You listeners, if you haven't picked up on that over the last few years, you will have noticed that there's been many evolutions and elevations in my life, most of which I am very, very grateful for. Some of them were really fucking hard lessons, to tell you the truth, but all of which put me in a much better state to step into the next version of myself. Now, if that's where you're at, Aligned to You listeners, and you are wanting to actually take your life from where it is right now and create something new and different, sometimes you have to actually look backwards and go, well, what parts of my life are actually helping? What parts of my life are perhaps not showing that I'm not adapting so well to stress right now? Now, those of you who've been following me for years, you may have done in the past, it used to be called the 8-ball quiz. Then it got changed to stress adaptation quiz. Now it all new and revamped and a new format, which if you want to check it out, it's called the body stress score quiz. Check it out. It's on the Aligned You website, which is ALIGNED, the letter u.com.au. I'll make sure the link is in the show notes. And on there is a body stress score quiz. Highly recommend you do it. Check in. If it's been a minute since you've done whichever version of the quiz in the past, I check in this. You've heard me say this before. I check in regularly. I check in on this particular quiz at least once a quarter to check in on how well I am or am not adapting, or are not, speaking full sentences, are not adapting to what's going on around me. Because the reality is, folks, there's always stress going to be around us. It's a matter of how well you are or are not adapting to it. And one of the things that happens, and this is something that I talk about in my Jumpstart workshop that I hold twice a month here in Mitchell Road Chiropractic. If you're interested in coming along, shoot us a message and we can certainly book you a seat. It's a 45-minute workshop. I go through the basics of how chiropractic works, how our innate intelligence works, how that is connected to our nervous system and our brain-body connection. If you are into things like connecting with your higher self and meditation, how that then actually allows you to connect better with your higher self and get the most out of the extra bits of self-care that you might be doing throughout the week. And I dive right into that. But in the body stress score quiz, I do not talk about what I'm about to talk about. In the Jumpstart workshop, I explain about the different ways stress actually integrates into our system or does not integrate into our system, Aligned to You listeners. So number one thing that happens when stress comes into our sphere is there's really 3 different ways that it gets dealt with or not dealt with. Number one, our body sees a stress or it comes into our system and we actually go, oh, hey, stress, nice to see you. I've seen you before and I can integrate you. The second thing that happens is a new stress comes into your sphere and you're in a good enough state that your body can actually say, you know what, I see you. I know what to do with you. I can integrate you. Nice try, but come again another day. And the third thing that happens is a new stress or sometimes an old stress comes into your system. And you're not in a state to integrate it. And your body goes, holy shit, what am I meant to do with this? And it stores it. It stores that stress. I like to think of it as potential energy. And it stores that potential energy that can get expressed in a few different ways. It might be back pain, it might be neck pain, it might be headaches, it might be fatigue, it might be your immune system's playing up on you, it might be that your mood's not great, it might be that you're having trouble sleeping. All of these different ways that this potential energy can actually be expressing itself to get you off your ass to go do something about it. Now, one of the cool things is with my chiropractic practice and my hands-on work, as we start to bring people into a structural alignment, is all of a sudden that can actually get released. And they notice things like their pain reducing more often than not always, because it's not always the right course of treatment for them. But if it's a right course of treatment for them, a series of adjustments, bringing your system back into a state of alignment allows for that integration of that energy. And all of a sudden, I get a bit geeky about this, folks, is all of a sudden that potential energy actually becomes kinetic energy and it gets released. And all of a sudden life looks a little different because you've got more energy, your pain is reduced, and you're actually able to get out and do the stuff that you want to be getting out doing. I mean, sometimes you have to go backwards to realize that you're not doing the things that actually light you up. Is your energy so low right now that you're actually not able to get out and see the people that light you up or do the activities that light you up? Something to think about. So check out the body stress score quiz. It goes through 8 key areas and you will get a score and a description of where you are right now, and also some really cool tips of what the next steps are. And along the way, Aligned You listeners, if you've ever got any questions, you're welcome to reach out. If you need a practitioner near you to be able to help you, if you're not close enough to get to me, if you require hands-on work, or if you want to be talking about coaching, we can certainly talk about that as well. But that body stress score quiz, as I said, is on alignedyou.com.au. Highly recommend you get that done as part of your homework this week so that you can actually see where your baselines are right now. Whenever I'm delivering a talk, I was delivering a talk at a gym yesterday, actually, and we were talking about my intentions as to what I wanted to leave them with. I had half an hour with them. I was doing somebody a favor by going and filling in. And what I was talking about was my intentions of that half an hour, which was, number one, to give people a better understanding. Number two was to actually give them some baseline so that they knew how to measure where they were at right now. And then number three was some tools. So with that body stress score quiz, that gives you all three of those, a bit more understanding about where you are right now, a baseline of what is happening for you and your system, and then also some guidance as far as tools are concerned to be able to start taking steps in the right direction. So rather than continuing going backwards, you actually get to go forwards. And I was having a conversation with somebody I love very much a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about alcohol. And he actually said, I know it was a conversation because we were having some lunch and I had mentioned that we were eating a certain way at the moment. I needed to drop some inflammation to assist with my hormones and also not drinking. And his description was boring. His message back was, that's boring. And I went, no, it's not. I feel heaps better for it. To which then, of course, he looked after things. And if he looked after things for us. And in terms of what, through the conversation that we were having, what was interesting was the fact that it came up that he realized how he was looking after himself probably wasn't serving him right now. So it becomes a choice, right? We can have an awareness of it and do nothing. And then there's no excuse or reason to be bitching and moaning about it further down the track. Or if you do have an awareness about it, which I certainly had an acute awareness about it, folks, about what was happening within my system and the flushes that I was having and the lack of sleep and all these things, I could ignore it and keep actually hurting myself, or I could take stock, take a moment and actually put some new processes in place and reframe my relationship around that as well. But that body stress score quiz is a very, very good place to start to see where you are at right now. So that's just about it for this week, Aligned You listeners. Before I go, my top 5 song of this week is More Than Friends by James Hype. It's actually a cover, but it's a really cool cover. I actually really enjoy it. Book or watching? I've actually been watching more brain vacay stuff, and I'll explain more about that in just a moment. But revisiting some oldies, probably aging myself right here. Grey hair probably does that too, but anyway. 10 Things I Hate About You and Clueless were on over the weekend, and it was really fun to watch them. High vibration, just good quality stuff and not too serious and not something that I had to concentrate too hard on. As far as what I did over the last week to align myself and align you is that I've come to an understanding that my brain functions a little differently now, and I'm giving myself some grace. This brain of mine that works at a rapid pace most of the time has slowed down a wee bit with some hormone changes. So I actually need to give myself more time to be able to do certain functions like admin. I don't know about you guys, but admin is not my favorite thing to do. Give me a mic. I'm much more happy. So what I've actually done on Saturday, which this might not sound like it's a de-stress, but for me it absolutely was, where I actually spent the day working from home on Saturday, just catching up and tying off all the loose ends that I didn't have a chance to actually put full attention to through the week. Because what I used to be able to do, and I don't actually know whether I did it all that well, but what I used to be able to do is flip hats very quickly. Whereas now I find it's like turning around the Titanic, is if I'm in practice mode, I'm very much stay in practice mode. If I'm in admin mode, I'm better off staying in admin mode versus trying to chop and change between them. So that awareness piece for me actually was really important in bringing alignment into my system. And for my quote this week, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in the future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. This approach has never let me down, and it has made all the difference in my life lessons. And that is a quote from Steve Jobs. I think I really like that in terms of having faith in we talk about the basic trust, which we'll talk about in future episodes, but having that basic trust that things will work out. There's a reason why the last 6 months were what they were, and I could get really frustrated by it, or I could take all the lessons from it and really move forward into the next phase of life with a whole new momentum. So that's my final thought for this week, Aligned You listeners. What things, when you review back over the last little while, have really shown you some perhaps great lessons, perhaps hard lessons, whatever the lessons are, what were they? And what decision are you going to make now in terms of moving forward? Are you going to make a shift and move yourself to a new version of you closer to the one that you envisage? Or are you going to keep doing the same things over and over again and hope for magically a different result, which, as we talked about last week, keep doing the same thing over and over again? You know what that's the definition of. So that's it for this week, Aligned You listeners. Bye for now, and I'll catch you next time. The information shared on Aligned You podcast is of general nature and for information purposes only. It is not specific medical or personal advice. You should seek assistance from your healthcare practitioner for your individual circumstances. Any information provided doesn't imply endorsement or third-party devices or products and cannot provide you with health and medical advice.